She would remember it later as the night everything changed. But in the moment, in the rose-scented garden with her heart lodged somewhere near her throat and her husband's eyes scanning the crowd, she was thinking about only one thing: survive. She grabbed the arm of the nearest man without looking at his face. She did not have time for faces. She had time only for the desperate, humiliating words she needed to say before Edmund Calloway's gaze reached her corner of the garden.
Please, pretend you know me, just for tonight.
The man went very still. She finally looked at him, and the first coherent thought she had in that entire awful evening was, why is a man this beautiful standing alone in a garden? The second thought came half a second later, as his grey eyes settled on her with an attention that felt almost physical. He is going to say no. He did not say no. He offered her his arm. And the night, and everything after it, began. What she did not know in that moment was that the man whose arm she had taken was Caspian Northwood, the Duke of Westhaven, that he had been watching her across the garden for 20 minutes before she reached for him, that the name she was about to give him, Ivy Voss, was a name he already knew, a name tied to a document he had been searching for across 3 years of quiet, furious work. She did not know that she was, to him, a suspect. She did not know that by the end of that night, he would be certain she was not, and she could not have known, no one could have known, that the strange, desperate bargain struck in a rose garden on a Tuesday in June would end with justice and fire and a man standing in September, light saying words he had never said to anyone. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. The story begins in the garden. If this is your first time here, welcome home. This channel is for the readers who stay up too late, who feel things too deeply, and who have never once met a slow-burn romance they didn't finish in a single sitting. Subscribe now so you never miss a story, and leave a comment. Who are you already rooting for? Now, settle in. We have a long, beautiful road ahead. London in the summer of 1882 smelled of coal smoke and ambition, of fresh roses and old money. And Ivy Voss had learned, in 8 months of careful hiding, to move through it like something that did not quite exist. She had been practicing invisibility since January, since the night she had slipped out of Calloway House in the grey hour before dawn, wearing her plainest dress and carrying nothing but a small leather satchel, a borrowed name, and the absolute certainty that if she stayed one more night under that roof, she would not survive the season. The escape had not been dramatic. That was the part she could never explain to anyone, and she had explained it to no one, which helped. No shouting, no chase, no cinematic triumph, only the soft click of a latch, the cold air of an empty street, and the sound of her own breathing, loud and alive, proof of something she had begun to doubt. 8 months later, she stood in Lord Pembroke's garden in a borrowed silk gown, with a false name on her lips and a careful smile that revealed nothing. Agnes, her friend, her protector, the widow who had taken her in without a single inconvenient question, had secured the invitation. The plan was simple: be seen by no one who mattered, gather what gossip she could about whether Edmund Calloway had given up searching, and leave before the champagne was poured. She had been at the party for 47 minutes. She counted them. Counting was how she managed fear, by turning time into something measurable and controllable. When she saw him, Edmund Calloway, Baron of Ashgrove, her husband, he stood at the far end of the rose garden, golden-haired and smiling, performing the role of charming widower with the same ease he performed everything. He had told their social circle she had died of fever. She had read the notice herself. In a newspaper, Agnes had brought with the expression of someone delivering a diagnosis. It had been oddly clarifying to read your own death notice, to understand finally and completely how little you had ever been real to him, only useful, and now, inconveniently, absent. She had perhaps 15 seconds before his slow, systematic gaze reached her corner of the garden. She turned and walked directly into the chest of a man who did not stumble, which told her immediately that whatever she had walked into was immovable. "I beg your pardon," she said, and looked up. He was tall, exceptionally so. Dark hair, worn slightly long, eyes the color of the sky before a storm, grey, full of information, impossible to read. He wore a black coat of unmistakable quality and the expression of a man who had never once been apologized to and wasn't entirely sure what to do with it. "The fault was mine," he said. His voice was low, the kind that carried without trying. She had approximately 10 seconds. She said the words before she had fully decided to say them. "Please, pretend you know me. Just for tonight." The silence that followed lasted 2 heartbeats. He did not look alarmed, did not look amused. He looked, she would think about this word for days afterward, decided, as though some interior question had just received its answer. He offered her his arm. "Shall we take a turn about the garden, miss?" He left it open, waiting. She accepted the arm before she accepted the invitation. Voss, Ivy Voss. Northwood, he said, just the name. No title, no elaboration. She didn't ask. She was too busy not looking at Edmund, which required all of her available attention. They walked. He matched his stride to hers without being asked. Edmund's gaze swept past them, settled elsewhere. She exhaled. "You didn't ask why," she said, when they had put enough distance between themselves and the danger. "No," he agreed. Most people would have asked why. He considered this as though it were a genuinely interesting observation. Most people are not particularly useful in a crisis. She almost laughed. She stopped herself, but only just. They circled the garden. He spoke when spoken to, and was silent when silence served better, which was more often than she expected. When a baronet's nephew threatened to trap them in a story about fox hunting with no evident ending, Northwood placed one hand at the small of her back, barely there, barely anything, and said they had promised Lady Ashford a word. When they were clear of him, she looked up. "There is no Lady Ashford here. We have decided between ourselves that we have fulfilled the promise," he said. "That is sufficient. That is an extremely creative interpretation of honesty." "Thank you," he said, without a trace of irony. And she gave up trying to determine whether he was funny or simply strange, and decided the answer was probably both. When the danger had fully passed, Edmund retreated to the far terrace, the light sliding gold toward evening. She stopped walking. "You can go," she said. "I believe we're safe for now." "Now is an interesting qualifier," he replied. "It's an honest one." He turned to look at her fully, those grey eyes doing their thorough, unsettling work. "The man with the golden hair, he is looking for you, specifically." Not a question. Yes. And he will not simply stop. Men like him do not stop. Something moved across his face, a tightening at the jaw, gone before she could name it. "No," he said quietly. They generally don't." There was something in the way he said it. Not sympathy, exactly, recognition. The kind that comes not from imagination, but from experience. She wanted to ask. She did not. He gave her his card before they parted. She read it in the carriage home, Agnes watching from across the seat with the expression of someone exercising heroic restraint. Caspian Northwood. Mayfair. No title. Just the name. She turned it over. Turned it back. "There. He was watching you from across the garden," Agnes said, with studied casualness. "For 20 minutes before you spoke to him." Ivy's head came up sharply. "I beg your pardon. I noticed him noticing you. I'd have thought you'd have spotted him first." She had not. She had been counting exits. She tucked the card into her glove and said nothing more. But she was already thinking about what it meant. That he had been watching her before she ever reached for him. That he had agreed without asking why. That he had known, somehow, exactly what she needed. 20 minutes. He had already been watching. She did not sleep well that night. She almost never did. But that night, the reason was different. By lamplight, she spread the 3 items from her father's hidden trunk across the writing desk in her room. The letter in his cramped left-leaning hand, the brass key on its worn ribbon, and the document with the red seal. She had read the letter 12 times. She had it memorized. She read it again anyway. My dearest Ivy, if you are reading this, I have failed to protect you as I intended. I am sorry for that more than I can say. The key opens a lockbox at Coutts Bank, registered in your true name, not your married name, which was never really yours. Inside you will find the deed to Aldenmore, which is yours by right of inheritance from your grandmother's estate. I signed it into a trust to keep it from the man I was foolish enough to call a friend. The document with the red seal is proof of what he did, not to me, to another family, a good family, destroyed by the same hands that reached for ours. They deserve justice. I pray someone is still willing to seek it. Be careful, my love. Calloway smiles when he is most dangerous. Your father. She set the letter down and picked up the document. Dense legal language, faded ink, 2 names in the arrangement. Her father's, and another. A name she had seen before on grand buildings and brass plaques. The late Lord Arthur Northwood. She looked at the card still tucked in her glove. Caspian Northwood. She sat for a long time and let herself understand what she was looking at. Not coincidence, not chance. A thread that ran from her father's hidden trunk to a falsified trial, to a dead man in a prison cell, and from that cell, across 22 years of silence, to a man in a garden who had been watching her before she ever spoke to him. He knew, or he was looking. Either way, he had not been there by accident. She found paper, dipped her pen, 3 lines, sealed without her name. Old habits died hard. I believe we have more in common than one garden party. If you are willing to speak plainly, I am willing to listen. If not, then I suggest we agree to know nothing of each other. She gave it to Agnes's footman before dawn. The reply came before noon, in an upright, measured hand, with no wasted movement. Thursday, 3 o'clock, Northwood House, Mayfair. Come through the east gate. She read it twice. Then she looked at Agnes, who had been pretending to read the same page of a novel for 40 minutes. Ah, not a word, Ivy said. My face is perfectly neutral, Agnes replied. Your face has never been neutral in its life, said Ivy. And that, for the moment, was that the house did not announce itself. That was the first thing she noticed, and it said everything about the man inside it. No pillars, no crests, no iron gates designed to be read from moving carriages. Simply a large Georgian house, immaculate and entirely silent about itself. She found the east gate tucked between a stone wall and decades of unchecked ivy. Through it, a kitchen garden, productive and genuinely cared for. A housekeeper met her at the back door and led her not to the formal reception rooms, but to a study at the back of the house. 2 lived in for the word, with papers in systems only their owner could decode. 2 chess games in mid-progress, books that had been read rather than displayed, and a fire doing exactly the work required of it. Caspian Northwood stood when she entered. He was in shirt sleeves. She catalogued this with more attention than the situation strictly required and firmly redirected herself. He reached for his coat. She said, "Don't, on my account," and he left it where it was. They sat. She had prepared for this, rehearsed sequences, planned disclosures, contingencies. She opened with none of it. "Your father's name was Arthur Northwood," she said. "He was ruined and blamed for crimes that were not his. He died in prison. Edmund Calloway was responsible." Something changed in the room, not visibly, not in his face, but in the quality of the silence itself. It shifted from waiting to something older and more loaded. "Tell me what you know," he said. So she did. She told him about the letter, the key, the Aldenmore property, the document. She told him about her marriage, in the terms the situation required. Not the full shape of it, not yet, but enough for him to understand what Edmund was. He listened without interrupting, without the wincing discomfort most people produced. He received the information as something to be understood, rather than reacted to, and when she finished and placed the document on the desk between them, he read it in silence. When he set it down, he looked at her. "Do you understand what this is?" "Evidence. The legal language defeated me." "It is the original agreement," he said, "before the forgeries were laid over it. Your father signed as witness. I believe he did not understand what Calloway had placed in front of him. This document, combined with 3 years of evidence I have assembled separately, is sufficient to bring a criminal case." She looked at him for a long moment. "You've been building this case for 3 years." "Yes." "And I walked into you at a garden party." The corner of his mouth moved, that almost smile she was beginning to recognize. "You walked into me," he said. "You were standing in my path." "Duly noted." She looked at the document, then at him. "If we pursue this, Edmund will know. He will come for me, directly, this time." "I know. I'm not asking you to protect me," she said carefully. "I'm asking whether you understand the nature of what you're proposing." He held her gaze. "I have spent 3 years on this alone, against a man with considerable resources and no conscience. I understand the nature better than most, and I am telling you." Something shifted in his voice, something she hadn't heard in it before. "You will not be alone in it." Silence. The fire. Something settling between them that was quiet and significant and difficult to name. Then he proposed the arrangement, the social fiction, a betrothal, temporary and strategic, sufficient to give her protection in the circles where Calloway operated, and to explain their regular contact without arousing suspicion. "You want to pretend to be my fiancé," she said. "I want a strategic arrangement that takes the social form of a betrothal. That is the same thing. Functionally." She thought about it honestly. Edmund's resources, her exposure, what it meant to have an ally with a title and 3 years of evidence already in hand. She thought about what this would cost. Then she thought about what doing everything alone had already cost. 3 conditions, she said. "My autonomy is my own in all matters not tied to the legal case. You consult me. You don't instruct me." He agreed. "This ends when the case is resolved. No ambiguity." He agreed. "And if you withhold anything relevant to my safety, we are finished. No second chances." He held her gaze. Something moved behind his eyes that she couldn't quite name. "Agreed," he said. She extended her hand. He shook it. It was, she decided, the strangest handshake in the history of Mayfair. She was 3 blocks away before she let herself stop and breathe. "What have you done?" said the voice she had been arguing with for 8 months. She answered it as she always did now. Something. Finally. Something. Behind her, in the quiet of his study, Caspian Northwood sat with the document in his hands and looked at what he had not told her. That he had known her name before she gave it to him. That she had been, briefly, a variable in his investigation rather than a person. That he had gone to the garden party because Calloway used it, and had been watching her because he had not yet determined whose side she was on. He had determined it now. Every word she spoke had made it clear. The omission sat in his chest like something with weight and edges. Tell her, he thought. Soon. Before the trust is deep enough that the truth can break it. He did not tell her soon enough. She had not known he was a duke until Agnes set the morning paper quietly on the breakfast table on Saturday. And she read the notice, the full name, the title, the Duke of Westhaven seen at Pembroke's in the company of a Miss Voss of unknown origin, and sat with it for a long time, thinking, he didn't say he was a duke, he said just Northwood, as though the title were optional, as though he was testing something. She wrote him a note that said only, "I saw the paper. We will discuss this." His reply came within the hour. "Monday, if you're willing." She arrived to find him clearly prepared, papers set aside, chair angled toward hers, expression calibrated to receive whatever she brought. "You're a duke," she said. "Yes." "You didn't mention that." "You didn't ask my title. You asked my name." "Those are not separate things. To most people they aren't. I find them easier to separate." He looked at her steadily. "I wanted to know how you treated a man you believed to have no power over you." "And?" "You were," the almost smile, "entirely yourself," which was informative. She decided she didn't know whether to be flattered or annoyed, and settled on a third option, filing it away and moving on. The dinner was at Viscount Alderton's, 30 guests, several known to move in Calloway's circles, which made it ideal. Agnes had chosen the gown, deep wine red, the colour of a woman who has decided something. Caspian arrived at 7. He saw her at the top of the stairs and went very still. She stored that away somewhere she intended to examine later. He was, she discovered over the next 3 hours, remarkably good at this, not with performative warmth or theatrical devotion, but with the specific attentiveness of a man who paid very close attention to the person beside him. He refilled her water before she reached for it. He steered conversation away from topics that flickered discomfort across her face. When the wife of one of Calloway's associates asked with glittering eyes how the couple had met, he placed his hand briefly over hers on the table, and she answered, steadily, that it had been a garden party, which had the virtue of being entirely true. And then Edmund Calloway walked in. He entered from the far end of the room, late so, with the easy smile of a man who had never been made to wait for anything. She felt Caspian's hand cover hers under the table, before she was fully aware she had gone still. Not a public gesture, private, hidden, steady. Pressure that said, "I know, I see, I'm here," she breathed. Edmund worked the room clockwise and eventually arrived at their end of the table. His eyes moved from her face to Caspian's with the measured calm of a man concealing his surprises. "Northwood," he said warmly, "I didn't know you'd return to society." "Calloway," Caspian replied, with a pleasantness so complete it was indistinguishable from warmth. There was sufficient reason this season. Edmund's gaze moved to Ivy. The smile held. It always held. "And your companion?" "My fiancé," Caspian said, steadily. "Miss Ivy Voss, though I imagine you know the name." A beat, barely perceptible. Edmund's smile measured the distance between what he wanted to do and what he could afford to do in a room of 30 people, and found, as he always found, that the room won. "Congratulations," he said. "You're a fortunate man." "I know," Caspian said, quietly, and not to Edmund. 2 words. She felt them land somewhere she was not ready to acknowledge. Edmund moved on. The dinner continued. She did not look at Caspian for several minutes, needing those minutes to reassemble herself. When she did, he was speaking to Alderton about something political, expression neutral and attentive, but beneath the table, his hand had not moved. She turned her hand over and pressed her fingers briefly against his. He did not look at her, but his hand closed around hers, once, before releasing. That was the moment, though she would not name it for several more days. That Ivy Voss began to understand she was in trouble of an entirely different kind than the one she had started with. The case was moving. Fowler had been engaged. The coat's lockbox had yielded additional materials, a second deed, a letter from a barrister dated 1860, a witness statement that placed Calloway at the location where key documents had been forged. They met every other day. Papers spread between them, and they were good at this together in ways she found quietly remarkable. What she was trying not to find remarkable, and failing at, was the rest. The way he listened, the way he said her name, the way the room felt different when he was in it, as though the air had rearranged itself slightly. The fracture came on a Wednesday. She arrived early, and the study door was ajar, and she heard her name, not Caspian's voice, another man's, lower, older, the voice of someone accustomed to speaking in confidence. The Voss woman. You were certain she was clean? A pause. Then Caspian. I'm certain now. I was not initially. You went to the Pembroke party, specifically because you'd found her connection to Calloway. Yes. And you used the situation. A longer pause. Does she know any of this? Silence. The kind that answers. She did not knock. She pushed the door open. Caspian was on his feet before she had fully entered. The other man, silver-haired, former military in his bearing, assessed the situation, excused himself with practiced efficiency, and closed the door behind him. She stood in the middle of the room and looked at Caspian Northwood with the particular clarity that arrives when anger has been refined by enough repetition that it stops being loud and becomes something much quieter and more accurate. You thought I was part of it, she said. He did not look away. Initially, yes. You went to that party to find me. I went because Calloway would be there. I knew your name. I didn't know yet whether you were a victim or a participant. And when I grabbed your arm and begged you for help, I made a decision, he said. I assessed what I saw and decided you were telling the truth. How generous of you, she said, and meant it to land, and it did. He absorbed it without flinching. I should have told you. I was wrong to wait. The third condition, she said, if you withhold anything relevant to my safety, we are finished. Yes, he said. I remember. She looked at him for a long moment, at the man who had placed his hand over hers in a room where Edmund smiled, who had said, you will not be alone in it, with the quietness of someone who meant it precisely. She thought about what it must have cost to carry 3 years of grief in silence. She thought about how it must have felt to see her name in those documents and not know. She thought about the fact that he had decided correctly, and that telling her the truth just now had cost him something she could see plainly in the particular stillness of a man holding himself accountable without expecting mercy. She did not forgive him immediately. She was not built that way. I'm leaving. I need to think. She stopped at the door. Don't decide for me what I can handle. Whatever the reason, don't do it again. No, he said. I won't. She left. He did not sit down for a long time after she was gone. That evening, a note arrived at Cavendish Street. 3 lines, in that upright hand with no wasted movement. I should have told you from the beginning. I knew it, and I chose convenience over your right to the full truth. There is no sufficient justification for that. I am sorry. She read it twice. Then she picked up her pen and wrote 4 words back. I haven't decided yet. His reply came in 20 minutes. 2 words only. I'll wait. She looked at those 2 words for a long time. Then she folded the note and placed it in the silver box on her dressing table, beside the brass key and her father's letter, and went to bed. She slept, for the first time in months, without counting anything at all. She had been avoiding Northwood House, not avoiding the case. She had sent Fowler the information he needed, reviewed a draft complaint with professional detachment, answered 2 notes from Caspian through Agnes as intermediary. She had not decided yet. She was still thinking. She was in the middle of thinking, at her desk, rain against the window, when she heard it. The front door. Not a knock, the sound of a lock being worked, methodically, by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Agnes was out. She was on her feet before the sound finished. 8 months of careful survival overrode thought entirely. She moved silently to the door of her room, opened it. Below in the hall, a figure in a dark coat. Inside the house, a second figure waiting on the step. Edmund's men. Not Edmund. He was always somewhere well-witnessed and smiling. She had perhaps 90 seconds. She went to the window, second floor, the kitchen roof below, and went down the way women who have been afraid for long enough practice every possible exit, because you never know which door you will need until you need it. She did not run. Running drew eyes. She walked to Mayfair with the fast, purposeful stride of someone with somewhere to be, which was, for the first time in a long time, entirely true. She was soaked through when she reached the east gate. She pushed through without thinking, through the kitchen garden and the back door, past the housekeeper who stepped aside immediately, as though she had been briefed for precisely this eventuality. Caspian was in the study. He stood the moment she entered. He took one look at her, soaked, controlled, operating past her own fear, and asked no unnecessary questions. "What happened?" he said. Not a question. A prompt. His men were in the house. "Agnes is out. I came here." He was already moving. To the door. Voice low. The housekeeper appearing and receiving instructions. Then he came back. He stood in front of her and for a moment did nothing. Simply looked at her with those grey eyes that always saw more than they gave away. Then he said, "You're safe here." 3 words. She had heard them before from other people, and they had always felt like a promise that couldn't be kept. He said them like a fact. She sat down. He poured something from the decanter without comment and placed it near her, then sat in his chair, the one that had become, over these past weeks, simply his. "I haven't decided yet," she said. "I'm telling you because I'm here, and I thought you should know it doesn't mean I've decided." "I understand." She looked at the fire. "Why didn't you tell me the real reason?" A long pause, the pause of a man who does not often go looking for his own real reasons and has not, until this moment, found this particular one. "Because," he said slowly, "I did not want to be, to you, another man who had seen you as something useful before he saw you as a person. The rain, the fire. That's a very good reason," she said. "It was also a mistake." "Yes." She looked at her hands. "I haven't forgiven you. I want to be clear about that." "Clear. But I'm still here." He looked at her, and something in his face shifted. Not the almost smile. Something earlier than that. Something more unguarded. "I know," he said. "I'm glad of it." She picked up the glass. Neither of them spoke. When Agnes arrived an hour later, escorted, unharmed, magnificently furious, she found them at the desk, bent over the same documents, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. Agnes sat in the armchair by the fire and said nothing. Her eyebrows, however, were extremely expressive. The case was filed on a Tuesday morning. Fowler told them quietly in the corridor outside the clerk's office that it was among the most complete cases he had seen in 30 years of practice. The original agreement, the forged documents and the originals beside them, 3 witness testimonies, the financial ledgers, the barrister's letter, and one item Edmund Calloway had not known existed, because he had been so certain that Edward Voss was a man who kept nothing and told no one. He had underestimated the instinct of a frightened father who loved his daughter. They stood outside the courthouse in the thin autumn sunlight, London moving around them in its indifferent way. "It's begun," she said. "Yes. He'll know by this afternoon." "By noon, likely." A pause. She looked at him. "Are you afraid?" Something like surprise moved across his face. Faint, but there. "No." "I am. A little." "That's sensible," he said. "It doesn't feel like an achievement right now. It feels like standing at the edge of something very high." "It is," he said, "and you're still standing." She looked at him. This careful, patient, furious man who had built 3 years of quiet justice out of grief and refusal. "We're still standing," she said. Something moved closer to the surface of his face, not breaking through, but closer. Yes, he said. We are. Edmund Calloway was not a man who panicked. His response to danger was never fear but calculation, the rapid, cold assessment of what he stood to lose and what he could afford to do about it. He made 2 moves. The first, he called in every social debt he held and attempted, through 3 intermediaries, to have the case dismissed. The attempt failed. Fowler had anticipated it, and the judge to whom it was directed was one of the few men in London whom Calloway had never successfully obligated. The second move was more personal. He came to Northwood House himself, alone. At 9 in the evening, admitted by the housekeeper before anyone could stop it. Because Edmund Calloway could make a housekeeper open a door through sheer social confidence, and he had always known it. Ivy heard his voice from the study and felt her body go through its familiar sequence. The cold, the stillness, the instruction to breathe. She breathed. She stood. She walked into the drawing room. Edmund turned when she entered. He looked at her the way he always had, the assessing look of a man cataloguing something he considered his. He had not adjusted for the fact that she was no longer something he owned. Some men never did. Caspian was already there, standing near the window, looking at Edmund Calloway with an expression that contained 22 years of very specific emotion, allowing none of it to show in any way that could be described or quoted. "I've come to discuss this situation," Edmund said, with the warmth he deployed the way other men deployed weapons, calmly, between reasonable people. "Then you've come to the wrong house," Ivy said. He looked at her, the smile. Always the smile. "Ivy, you know this will destroy you as much as me. A woman who fled her husband, who has been," the perfectly timed pause, "living under a strange man's protection. You told London I was dead," she said. "I was grief-stricken. You were calculating. You're calculating right now." He turned to Caspian. "Your father was convicted by a court of law. Documents, evidence, a proper trial. You're going to embarrass yourself pursuing this. I'm going to destroy you pursuing this," Caspian said, without raising his voice, with the calm of a man who has been preparing for this exact conversation for 3 years and has nothing left to prove. "There is a difference." Edmund looked between them. For the first time, just a fraction of a second, the calculation in his eyes had a different quality, not fear, but the thing adjacent to it, the recognition that he had misread the room. "Whatever she's told you," he began. "She has told me the truth," Caspian said, "which I have verified, which is now before a judge." He walked to the door and opened it. "Good night, Calloway." Edmund looked at Ivy one final time. She held his gaze, did not look away, did not soften, did not perform any of the small gestures of appeasement she had spent 4 years of marriage learning to deploy. She simply looked at him as one person looks at another. They are finished with. He left. The door closed. The house was very quiet. She stood in the middle of the drawing room and felt something she had not felt in 4 years. Not triumph. It was too quiet for triumph. More like the lifting of a weight she had carried so long she had forgotten it was there. She became aware, gradually, that she was crying. Not dramatically. She never did anything dramatically. Just quietly, the way things release that have been held too long. Caspian did not say anything. He did not attempt to fix it or explain it or make it less. He simply moved to stand beside her, close enough that she was aware of the warmth of him, and waited. When she had finished, she looked up at him. "I'm all right. I know," he said, and offered her his handkerchief. She took it. Plain white, the initials C. N, in one corner without decoration. "Of course your handkerchief is perfectly ironed," she said. "Mrs. Webb is thorough," he replied. She laughed, slightly waterlogged, but real. He looked at her when she laughed, with the look she had been trying not to think about for weeks. Not the almost smile, something more unguarded, something that made her very aware of how close they were standing, and how still the house had become. "Caspian, Yes. The arrangement. The agreement that this ends when the case is resolved. She looked at him steadily. I'm wondering whether I wrote that condition too broadly. He waited. In the sense, she said, that the case is about to be resolved, and I find I'm not ready for everything to end. Ivy, he said, I've been in love with you since approximately the third day of our arrangement. I've been trying to determine the appropriate moment to say so for 2 months. I have concluded there is no appropriate moment and I am simply going to say it. She looked at him. The third day. You told me I looked at everything like I was filing it. No one had ever said that to me before. And that made you fall in love with me. It was a contributing factor, he said. She turned to face him fully. I have been trying not to want this, she said, choosing honesty over elegance as she always did. Because wanting things has historically been expensive for me, and I have failed, which is, for the record, entirely your fault. I accept responsibility. You should. He raised one hand, slowly, with the deliberateness he brought to everything, and touched her face. Just his fingers against her cheek. Barely there. She leaned into it, infinitesimally, the way a person leans when they have been braced against everything for too long. I haven't forgiven you yet. I want that on the record, one final time. Understood. It's close, though. And then, finally, past the almost smile, past all the careful restraint of a man who had kept everything controlled for 22 years, a real one, small and private and entirely real. I can work with close, he said. The estate was smaller than she had imagined. Her property now, properly transferred after the case concluded, and Calloway's legal architecture collapsed in the methodical, inevitable way that things built on lies eventually do. It sat in the Hertfordshire countryside, under an autumn sky of pewter and old gold, rolling grounds, a working farm, a house that wanted attention but had good bones. She stood at the gate and looked at it for a long time. Edmund Calloway had been sentenced in August, 7 years, after a trial that Fowler described, with quiet professional satisfaction, as among the most airtight cases he had seen in 30 years of practice. The name of Arthur Northwood had been formally cleared. The notice in the papers was brief, factual, entirely insufficient, and entirely real. She had read it aloud to Caspian in the study at Northwood House on the morning it was published. Without planning to, she had simply found herself reading it, and he had listened without moving, and when she finished, he had said nothing for a long moment. Then he had said thank you, just that, and she had understood everything it contained. She heard him behind her, the quiet sound of his footsteps on the gravel, unhurried as always. He came to stand beside her at the gate and looked at the house with the expression he wore when he was thinking something he had not yet decided to say. It needs work, she said. Most good things do, he replied. She looked at him sideways. He was looking at the house, but she had the impression, she often had this impression now, having given herself permission to pay attention, that he was aware of her in his peripheral vision with the same constant quiet attentiveness he brought to everything. You realize this doesn't resolve anything between us, she said. The case is over. The arrangement is technically concluded. We could go back to Mayfair, restore the estate by correspondence, attend the same events, be perfectly civilized about the whole thing. Is that what you want? He asked. She looked at the grounds going golden in the September light. At the life that was, for the first time she could remember, simply hers, uncontested, unencumbered, entirely her own. No, she said. He turned to look at her fully, the full weight of those grey eyes on her face. Ivy, I have been in love with you since approximately the third day of our arrangement. I have concluded there is no appropriate moment to say so, and I am simply going to say it. You already said it. I know, he said. I wanted to say it here, at the beginning of something, rather than the end. She looked at the house, the grounds, the enormous, specific, entirely welcome task of what came next. Then she looked at him. I have been trying not to want this, she said, choosing honesty over elegance as she always did, because wanting things has historically been expensive for me, and I have failed at not wanting it, which remains, entirely, your fault. I accept responsibility. You should. He reached for her hand, slowly, with that deliberateness she had come to understand was not coldness, but care. The care of a man who had learned, very early, that the things worth having were worth handling with attention. She let him take it. Is this a real engagement then? She asked. Not a pretend one. If you'll have it, he said. She looked at him, at the man who had said yes in a garden without asking why, who had built 3 years of quiet justice out of grief and patience, and the absolute refusal to let the wrong things stand, who had looked at her, not through her, not past her, not at the shape of her usefulness, but at her. I'll have it, she said. He kissed her in the September light, at the gate of an estate that was hers, with the case closed and Edmund Calloway in prison, and the name of Arthur Northwood restored, finally, to what it had always been. She kissed him back. She was good at it, which surprised neither of them. When they separated, she looked at the house, at the work ahead, at the enormous, specific, entirely welcome task of it all. It really does need a great deal of attention, she said. I have considerable free time, he said, now that a particular 3-year project has concluded. You're offering to help restore my estate. I'm offering to help restore our estate, if the terminology is acceptable. She considered this. She made him wait approximately 4 seconds. She counted, because she always counted. And then she said, The east wing first. It has the best light. He almost smiled. Then he did, and it was, she decided, even better than she had expected. Then you know exactly what kind of story this was. The kind that earns it. The kind where the ending isn't given to you. It's built, slowly, scene by scene, truth by truth, until 2 people who had every reason to stay guarded choose, finally, to stay instead. Ivy got her name back. Caspian got his father's. And Edmund Calloway got precisely what 3 years of meticulous, patient, furious preparation had prepared for him. If this story moved you, if you stayed all the way to the East Wing, please subscribe. Every subscriber is someone who believes slow burn stories are worth the burn. That justice, in fiction at least, can look like a man in a garden who says yes without asking why, and a woman who keeps the most important things pressed closest to her body, and the long, beautiful work of learning to trust something you cannot yet fully see. Leave a comment. Tell us. Was there a moment you knew, a line that got you, a scene you'll be thinking about on the drive home? Share this with someone who needs a story with a real ending, someone who has been pretending long enough. We'll see you in the next one.